Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. My name is Rachel. I'm with the CSU Alumni Association, and I'm so glad you've decided to join us for our Alumni Night in with the Avenir. We have a really unique topic for you tonight, and I hope that you enjoy it. Before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you to all of our attendees and a big shout out to our CSU Alumni Association members. Membership makes different events and programming we do possible. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that, I've got a QR code here on this slide for you. If you would like to scan that, you can learn a bit more about membership and how it makes what we do possible. I also would love to help you if you're having any technology problems. So I'll go ahead and comment my information if you need to reach out and I can help you with that. We also have lots of different upcoming programs on our website, both in person and virtual. So if you're interested in any of those, I'll be including our calendar link at the end of our program today, as well as a survey link in the chat. I also will include the awesome exhibit information for what we're talking about tonight, which I'm super excited to share with you all. So I have some very special guests. You're not here for me. I have great Avenir Museum guest with me tonight. The first person I'm going to introduce you to is Megan, who is going to kick it off and introduce our students who are here with us tonight, Brooklyn and Sarah. So Megan, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are thrilled to be bringing you this program in conjunction with the Alumni Center this evening. My name is Megan Osborne. As Rachel said, I am also an alum, 04, and I am the assistant curator and collections manager for the Avenir Museum and have been working with the collection for about 13 years, a little more, I think, now at this point. So I have been around the block a little bit. I have done a lot of exhibitions in my time. The exhibition we're speaking about tonight, Where Is Everybody, was put together completely by the students who were part of a course called DM 563, the Care and Exhibition of Museum Collections. This course has a lot to do with, as the title says, the care and exhibition of museum collections, but also teaches the students not only about care management handling, but how to interpret collections, how to develop a professional code of ethics for careers in museums, how to identify funding and grant resources, how to apply interpretation and exhibition techniques using theories of historic objects and material culture. It provides practical experience in the record development of collections, including a lot of the computer-based technology that we use, how to inventory, catalog, how to establish provenance of pieces within the collection. So there are a lot of really applicable skills that the students learn in this class, but one of the main projects that is a culmination of their work throughout the semester is an exhibition. And this course, what we're speaking about tonight, was taught in the spring of 2021. Yes, that's correct. My dates are crazy now. And the students put together an absolutely amazing exhibition, Where Is Everybody? So Sarah Silva Bernstein and Brooklyn Benjamin were both members of this class. I did not teach it, but I was around and was able to witness how hard the entire class worked on this exhibit. And we were lucky enough to have these two students, Sarah and Brooklyn, talking with us tonight about the development, how the exhibition came to be. But what makes this even a little bit more special is both Brooklyn and Sarah have continued their work with the museum over the summer of 2021 and into the fall semester. So they have a lot of continuing experience and involvement with the museum and will have a lot to add to this discussion tonight. So I'm so pleased that they are joining us and really will be kind of taking it away. I will moderate a little bit, but we are here all to hear from them. So thank you again for joining us, everyone in the audience, and Sarah and Brooklyn. You will notice that Brooklyn at the bottom of your screen is actually in the gallery. So if you do have any questions about how the exhibition looks, if you haven't been able to see it in person, maybe towards the end of our discussion, she could move around a little bit in the space if you'd like to see anything. So please absolutely put those questions in the chat. And I am going to start just with a question, and maybe Sarah, you could start off for us. Could you give us a brief overview of the exhibition for people who may not know what it's about?
Yeah, well, over the summer, I worked at the front desk, and I kind of came up with a little spiel that I share with our guests as they come in. So it's a good reminder for me of how I would talk to guests. So thanks for that question. So the exhibit, as Megan shared, is titled "Where is Every Body?" So 2 words, every body. And this exhibit is looking at some of the psychosocial, cultural, and I would say even political aspects of mannequins and their display and use, not only in museum settings, but also in retail settings, or even other settings like over COVID-19, we've seen auditoriums and sports fields that are filling their seats with mannequins because they want the seats to look full for TV broadcast. So we looked at kind of the meanings of, of shared.
Oh, I think my screen froze there for a second. Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's really a fascinating topic. Can you, both of you, maybe answer this question? How did the class come up with this topic? Was it something that was assigned? Was it something that you came together as a group on? How did it kind of materialize?
I can start off with this one. The instructor for the course, Dr. Katie Knowles, previously was a curator here at the Avenir. And she kind of had this question that she had been asked by museum guests. There's a room in the back of the museum where we store all the mannequins. That is a little bit creepy, to be honest. But she said that visitors would ask questions about the mannequins all the time, and they just kind of go unnoticed, or maybe they don't have the answers to it. And then this idea for the exhibit also came from just necessity. With COVID-19 restrictions on campus, we were still social distancing, masked. Part of our semester was virtual and part was in person. So we were still pretty bound by the restrictions to mediate COVID-19. So we couldn't all be standing super close together, dressing mannequins in historic garments, which usually does involve the help of 2 people. So we really needed something that we could space out and kind of flesh out without having to be near each other. And I think that this was the perfect idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so timely, I think, also with everything that's been happening in the world recently, to think about mannequins. I'm sure people have noticed, if you've been in retail stores in the past year or so, mannequins are starting to evolve, and hopefully that will start to trickle down into the museum world as well. But as you can see behind Brooklyn, our mannequins are white-bodied. They are faceless, but they're also, we don't have a lot of variation in size, in height, in body position. So this is a really interesting topic to explore. I think so relevant to what's happening culturally at this time, sort of kind of seeing these ideas coalesce. As you guys were researching the exhibit, how did the concept evolve? Did Dr. Knowles come to you and say, our topic will be mannequins? Did you all have a say in the research sections that you undertook as you worked your way through the class and the planning of this show?
Yeah, there's a lot of parts there. I think Brooklyn and I could probably split up answering the various pieces. So as Brooklyn was sharing, Dr. Knowles did share with us that the topic would need to be around mannequins. But really the theme and the title and the focus of mannequins was up to the class. And we were a small cohort, I want to say 6 of us. And we were an interdisciplinary cohort of graduate students that blended both the history, public history department and the apparel and merchandising department. And so we had folks with various perspectives academically, but we also had folks with, I would say, quite social justice minded mentality. And so as I recall, one of the very first things that we started to talk about as a cohort is mannequins. Who's not here? What's not in the room when we see the mannequins here at the Avenir, but also when we think about the mannequins that we may have interacted with in our lives in retail or sports or other settings. And that's where we started to kind of come up with different buckets of interest for themes. So we started to think, okay, how is gender represented here or not? How is age? How is ability? And that's where our conversation started to lead us, and thinking about, again, who's not here and what's always here. So I will leave it at that. I know that there's more to say and more that you kind of asked, Megan, but I'd love Brooklyn to jump in.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. You're always so eloquent and well versed in how to say things. Just to kind of piggyback off of that, it was a very, very collaborative process. I think that since we knew we would be pushing on a time limit, so we were virtual for the first 2 weeks of the semester last semester. We were in person until spring break, which was in mid-April, and then we were back online. So we had a very condensed timeline. And one of the main goals I think a lot of us had for the course is that we wanted to actually install an exhibit and produce something that people would be able to see and interact with. And then when we committed to that goal, it was a long process of deciding how this would look and what the direction was going to be and what we all wanted to focus on, because there's so much to discuss, which was a little bit surprising personally, because mannequins, especially in museum settings, are designed to not intrude on the exhibit. So moving that focus, there were so many questions we had, but there's very little published research to support, just like the endeavor of this type of research in the exhibit. So it was really interesting to kind of get in on that as it's becoming more prevalent in the industry.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Brooklyn, the lack of research. Was there anything beyond that really surprised both of you as you were starting to dig into kind of the meat of the topic? That I know you all divided up and worked on specific topical areas within the exhibit. So as you were working in those areas, was there anything that really surprised you? And could you tell us a little bit about what each of you focused on during the research portion?
Yeah, so we do have quite a few classmates that couldn't attend tonight. So I'm just going to run through like a short list I have written down of the different topics that we did end up covering. So through this exhibit, we discuss gender, ability, evolution of mannequins, body proportion in mannequins, color, current applications and uses of mannequins, mannequins' origin, and then the representation of age through mannequins, as well as we wanted to tie in the museum piece a little bit and discuss how mannequins support the garments that we display on them usually. So there is a section about the support that mannequins provide to historic garments.
And which section was yours, Brooklyn, that you undertook?
Yes, so I undertook the evolution of the mannequin, or the origin of the mannequin, excuse me. And mannequins basically started as artist figures, little tiny mannequins that you can move to show different proportions of the body and trace it. And then they evolved into retail settings with the popularity of ready-to-wear, like made clothing. They would send a person out onto the street wearing a certain designer's clothing, and they would be called a mannequin even though they were a living person. So the term mannequin has been applied in a lot of different ways through the history of the word, and the use of mannequins in retail isn't actually their origin. So that was very interesting to me. I'd never even stopped to think where mannequins came from at all.
I am sure many people are in that same boat. Sarah, what area did you focus on in the exhibition?
Yeah, so I'm also in the Women and Gender Studies graduate certificate program. So I chose gender, and I found quite a bit interesting. There was some research that looked at the binary nature and representation of mannequins in retail settings specifically. And one interesting piece of literature demonstrated that through various retrospective photographs of different retail displays of mannequins, when male mannequins were clumped together, they were shown as being interactive, engaging with one another, also showing signs of strength. And then when women mannequins were displayed in these retail settings, the research showed that they were making gestures that separated themselves from one another. So they weren't really in an interactive scene, that they also could seem more aloof or on their own. And in supporting roles. So maybe it might look like they were sitting at a desk versus the male mannequin would display himself as a businessman in an exchange with another businessman. So that was an interesting piece of literature on the kind of binary display of these mannequins in retail settings. But I also found more recent literature looking at the very minimal amount of or minimal availability rather of gender neutral mannequins. And what this research had shown was that specifically museums, academic museums particularly, had relied on preparators to actually change the mannequins that are available versus being able to buy mannequins that are gender inclusive. And so the research really ended with this call for mannequins that are available that aren't just a blend of male and female binary bodies, but that in and of themselves are mannequins that are gender neutral. And there's so much more research to go into what that would entail, but that was really the call of that research.
That is really fascinating. Yeah, and having put together a number of exhibitions, I have run into this exact problem, and I have had to perform some mannequin surgery to fit a traditionally female body into a gender non-conforming or gender neutral form. And it definitely is difficult to reduce something or build something after the fact, and having something put together already made would be so incredibly helpful in the development of exhibitions, I would think, worldwide in museums across the globe. With all the different topics that you guys covered, which, Brooklyn, thank you for putting that list together, was there anything challenging in how those different pieces came together. I know that we don't have the other students with us here tonight, but is there anything that two of you can remember that you had to overcome when bringing all of these different research areas or research focuses into one cohesive story?
I will go ahead and speak for one of our classmates, Ollie. Ollie took on the job of editing. So when there's 7 different people writing labels, you can imagine how difficult it would be to edit all that. But they really took charge of that task. And I think that was the part that I was the most worried about was getting the right tone and keeping it consistent throughout the exhibit, but also, keeping our personalities in the writing. So just that type of writing is a little bit challenging, and taking on the editing of that type of writing is Ollie is a saint.
Yes, I will second that. I know they're not here tonight, but Ollie did an absolutely amazing job keeping everyone's voice, but also making it feel cohesive when you're in the exhibit reading the text. So kudos to them, even though they're not here.
I would also say, if I think back on challenges from this project, I was working as the project manager as well as to at least weekly check-ins with everyone to make sure that things were progressing on time, on budget, and that things such as label edits were complete so that they could be sent to the printer on time and we could have them back for install. And while it was challenging, I would say that as a team, we did really, really well with communication and being honest if we needed to have more time. And I felt that, again, while challenging, we did really well as a group.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing it up, Sarah, because that leads me just right into my next set of questions for you. And I really want to dive into the installation of this exhibit because it was such a challenge given the restrictions due to the COVID-19 pandemic during the period. What was the process? Maybe Sarah, as a project manager, how did everyone organize so that the exhibit could be physically installed in the gallery?
Great question. And actually, this was one of Brooklyn's other responsibilities. And so while I could speak to it, I think that you had experience managing the install. So I'll hand.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. So I have previous experience in the retail industry as a visual merchandiser. So I have worked a lot with mannequins and displays, which is why I felt like this would be a good challenge for me to flex those muscles in the museum context. So I decided to take on the responsibility of organizing the install. Like I said, we had a late spring break and we were installing the very last week up until spring break, because post spring break we were virtual. So everybody wanted to participate and needed to participate to share that workload. So I drew up a couple plans and we spent a bit of time in the back, like 3 people at a time, just talking about different ways that we could organize the mannequins based on the labels that we had written, just to try and get a narrative flow and a logical flow into the display and installation of the exhibit. So then when it came time, down here at this end of the case is one door that opens, and then the case is very long, the length of the room. So there's only one entrance into the case. Mannequins are not super heavy, but they're very awkward. And there were 7 of us that needed to install a mannequin. So we just split up into chunks of time. And At first, we thought it would be best if everyone installed their own mannequin, and then we quickly realized that that doesn't make sense for people who are closer to the door to install first. So a group of us ended up moving all the mannequins into the case, and then throughout the week, each person who came in on their dedicated time made small, minor adjustments to make sure that everything was even and was facing the right way, and that everything looked presentable down to the little positions of the mannequin's feet, if you will. So yeah, it was a really iterative process, but it was definitely, I don't know, it was worth it, I guess. Yeah.
And those install days were really fun, even though we were limiting the amount of folks that could be in the gallery at one time so that we could observe COVID precautions. The small groups that were able to come in were really collaborative, and we had fun, and we laughed together, and we took pictures, and we just had a really nice time. And that was, I think, a highlight for me, especially during a time when social interactions were particularly limited, especially in the classroom environment. So that end piece felt like a bit of a celebration for multiple reasons, like being together and then also putting the exhibit up. And one thing I think I want to actually ask Megan to help give the audience some context. If you could maybe give us an average of how long planning, preparation, and install usually takes for an Avenir exhibit.
Sure. For a basic Avenir exhibit where the mannequins to be dressed, which is something that you all didn't have to contend with, it probably takes a good 12 to 18 months if we are starting from scratch with just an idea if it was an in-house exhibition. So we're pulling things from our own collection, bringing together a cohesive group of objects that's going to tell whatever the story is that we are trying to illustrate through the collection, doing the research, writing the text, going into production for the graphics, for the text panels, all of that I know you did, and then working towards developing interactives that are going to be meaningful to the public as they're in the space. So yeah, I think sort of a minimum of 12 to 18 months.
I appreciate you sharing that context, because to go back to what Brooklyn was saying about our timeline, we started mid-January 2021, and then we had to install by mid-April 2021. So instead of 12 months, we had 12 weeks. We also had 6 students, and we had our faculty member. So we definitely had more hands, but there was a lot of work to be done. And I think that is a testament to the commitment and vigor of this particular group.
Absolutely. It was a Herculean effort by all involved, and it just ended up absolutely amazing. But I think you're right, Sarah. The group worked so well, and the communication was so open and honest, which is so key in being able to move a project of this magnitude forward in such a compressed timeline. Yeah. My next question for you guys is looking at the gallery now, and I know that you both have had some time to be in the space since you have continued working at the museum over the last few months. Is there anything about the exhibit that you wish you could change now?
I have a couple ideas, but Brooklyn, if you want to jump in.
I don't really have any ideas.
Okay. Well, again, since I was working in the front reception and guest welcome area over the summer, I definitely had some moments to be in and out of that exhibit. And I think we as a group underestimated how folks were really going to receive this project, this exhibition well. And so I think that we have two interactives in the exhibit where folks can, we'll probably go into this a little bit more shortly, but I'll just name there's two interactives for folks to give us feedback and to share their experience. And I think now, after it's been done and it's been up for some time and we can see how much people are interacting with these interactives, that maybe we would have made them bigger, or maybe put maybe just tweaked a couple things. One of them has post-it notes on a wall, and the post-it notes they're just falling down all the time because people are just really interacting. And we had a whiteboard up with asking people for feedback, and it's been filled up a couple times, and so we've had to take pictures of it to hold the former comments in perpetuity, to erase for new comments. So I think we underestimated how many people would be coming in and being really excited, which I'll share more about that later, but those would be what I would tweak a little bit.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a side note to add to that. Thank you for bringing up that point. I also think it's worth mentioning that while we were planning this exhibit, doing the research, installing, the museum was closed to the public. So we had no idea how people were going to respond. Like, we couldn't test the waters a bit on like our volunteers and ask their opinions because they just weren't in the museum. And so we were a little bit, I remember being apprehensive about the fact that in the next room over, there's this beautiful exhibit with these African wax prints. And then in this room, there's a bunch of naked mannequins. People might have been expecting more, pomp and circumstance when the museum opened back up after being closed due to the pandemic. But I think that, yeah, we definitely underestimated how engaged people would be in the exhibit.
Good problem to have.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I think, just to add to that for both of you, I think the museum staff also underestimated how very popular this topic would be. I will be the first to admit, when it was floated to me, I was slightly skeptical, and I thought, we are a clothing and textile museum and we are going to put up a bunch of mannequins with no clothes on. Well, let's see how this goes. And here it is, wildly popular. And I think it just is a testament to how interested people are in some of the back end or maybe less glittery parts of the museum. Those things are fascinating. And talking about mannequins and talking about that that understructure and what they do and what they provide or don't provide, or what is lacking in that area, is so thought-provoking, and you don't think about it till someone prompts you to do so. And I think the interactives also really do that. And you are both correct in that we all really underestimated the level of interaction that we would have with the visitors. So can you all talk a little bit about, in detail, about the two specific interactives that you have in this show?
Sarah, if you want to start talking, I'm going to situate myself so that the guests can see the interactives.
Yeah.
Awkward.
I'll start with the chalkboard. So one area of the exhibit has a medium-sized chalkboard on the wall, and next to it is a label with a prompt for folks to share their reflections about the exhibit and how it impacted them, or feedback that they have for us as the co-curators of this exhibit. And so you can see there on the screen, centered is the blackboard, and then to the left you can see a image of there's a photograph that was taken of the blackboard, because the blackboard got filled up like it is right now with feedback, and we didn't want to lose those previous comments. And again, being in a pandemic that we also have the clean chalk when people use it, and then the dirty chalk in little holders that the chalk goes in so we can clean them daily. So there was also these extra considerations that we had to make for things that folks would be touching that maybe before this pandemic we wouldn't have been so concerned with. We probably just would have had 10-cent chalk out there, but we had to think, okay, if we want people to write, what are they writing with, and can we clean that on a daily basis? So is there anything else you want to share about that chalkboard? We can go into some detail about comments, but I know you just kind of wanted maybe an overview of what the interactive is.
I want to ask a quick question, excuse me. I feel like I remember a story that was a little bit comical about how you finally decided on the chalkboard. Is that?
Yes. So one of our other classmates was in charge of the interactives, and at one point we were dead set on having a mirror in the exhibit, because that's really like the essence of what we were trying to get at, is where do you see yourself in this exhibit? Do you see yourself in this exhibit? So we got a little hung up on our initial ideas for interactives. And at first we were like, oh, we can paint on the wall. We can paint a chalkboard on the wall. We'll do chalk paint. It'll be great. Like, very fun, little crafty thing. And then Dr. Knowles suggested, this is a gallery that we use year round. We don't really need a chalkboard in a gallery on the wall. So we were trying to just racking our brains with how to get around this. We can't paint a chalkboard on the wall. And then one day one of us just said, we could just hang a chalkboard on the wall instead of altering the paint. So that just shows like how invested we were in the little details and how close we were with this work, that sometimes it was hard to like take a step back and realize like, oh, chalkboards exist that you can hang on the wall.
Yes, and as the person having to install the next exhibition in that space, I thank you for not painting a chalkboard on the wall. And how about the next exhibit? Brooklyn, can you slide just a little bit, or sorry, interactive?
So I think that's a good view. So off to my left here, is a paint. We did end up painting on the wall, so we got that goal accomplished, but we took the average height of each mannequin type that the Avenir has to display clothing, and we painted a mannequin on the wall using a projector. So one of our classmates traced and painted it on the wall, and then we invite guests to stand next to it. So we've also painted like a little bit of a ruler on the wall to show the foot markings up to 6 feet, so that people can see how they compare height-wise to the average size mannequin at the Avenir. And you can see that there's quite a few entries, I guess, Post-it notes on the wall, and a lot of them are shorter than the mannequin. We do have a couple way up there, but I would venture to guess that was a jump rather than someone actually that tall.
I think that's probably true. Sarah, can you talk a little bit about the in-person feedback that you received while you were serving in the interim position of the Visitor Services Coordinator over the summer?
Yeah, there were some interesting themes that came across. One theme when folks were exiting the exhibit was that they wanted to show me how they used mannequins in their own lives. And they would often have photographs on their phone to show me how they've put mannequins in their yard or their home as art displays. There was one woman who she had a mannequin on her front porch, and she changed the outfit every month to theme for something about that month. It was kind of cute, like grade school teacher move. And she had several photos, like a year's worth of mannequin shots to show me. So there was a lot of people who, as they started to think about mannequins outside the retail setting, So that was really cool. Another theme that came across was a lot of folks that identified as women sharing that they did not feel represented, particularly by the size and the age, and also the race availability of the mannequins in the kind of general marketplace and in museums. And so there was just some empathy there in listening to their stories and their experiences, and noticing that they felt a really deep personal connection with the exhibit, and just kind of letting them have some space to share their life reflections, and how those measure up with gender stereotypes and how that's impacted them. And then there was also there was kind of an interesting story that I'll tell. So we had a group of guests come in, and when they were exiting, one of the guests said that they didn't feel like the exhibit was meaningful, and why was this important? And they were the last guests of that day, and I always go into that exhibit to clean the chalk, as I was saying. So I went in to clean the chalk, and I noticed a comment that I knew wasn't there before, which was, kind of like, why is this relevant? And it said first world problems, talking about these topics. And so I was like, that's, interesting. The point of this exhibit is to get people thinking. So this person clearly thought this inspired some thought within them. So while maybe our ideas about the impact of this exhibit were different, I appreciated the feedback. Well, then within a couple days, we had another group of visitors come in and leave, and before they left, shared how impactful it was with them. And I went in to clean the chalk, and I saw a comment that drew a line to that first guest's comment about this being a first world problems topic exhibit, and mentioning that this person might have some social locations that prevent them from being able to see the less than privileged positions that we highlight in the exhibit. So in a way, it was like, okay, we're getting people thinking. There's actually a dialogue happening on our chalkboard, and this is cool. And I really liked seeing that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the greatest stories to come out of this interactive, that it really brought these two different viewpoints truly together through chalk. And in this conversation, although there wasn't a continued conversation post, it was really nice to see the specific interaction between comments, not just about the exhibit as a whole. That I think was a really special moment in the life of this exhibit, in my view. So I think, yeah, that was really great. Has this exhibit for both of you accomplished the goals that you had prior to creating it? So, we had this goal of these people having this dialogue together. Were there other goals that you as a class had hoped the exhibit would accomplish? And do you think those came to fruition?
Yeah. So first off, the big major goal for a lot of us was just to get the exhibit installed. And we did that. There was quite a few times that throughout the semester that I just thought, there's no way this is going to work. There's no way it's going to work. Or, I was scared we would put it up and people would be upset and we might have to take it down. So honestly, that it happened at all is a really big accomplishment for me, and it's exceeded, my expectations, just because of all the amazing things that we hear about it.
Yeah, I would second that. Really, the major goal was the install. And I'm so glad that it was installed when it was, and that it was able to be presented with just the overall reopening of the Avenir. So it not only felt really special, I think, for us as a class to meet our deadline, but I would say special to me and maybe others too, that we were able to be part of this kind of grand reopening post pandemic closures, and that just felt really good.
Yeah, and coming from the museum staff perspective, it was so wonderful to have a student driven exhibit, no matter the topic, but just a student driven exhibit as part of that reopening, because it truly does get to the essence of why the museum is here. We are a teaching collection, whether it be about the objects in the collection or the fixtures, the mannequins that support the collection. So being able to showcase how students use the collection and the research and the really thought-provoking themes that you all were able to pull out of the topic, it was just so meaningful for us on the staff side to be able to present that, and really for it to be a stage to celebrate this work, that very, very hard work that you all and all of your classmates put in over that very, very condensed couple of weeks. How did you all find the experience in the class as a whole? So from the research to the install, did it meet the expectations that you had? Maybe each of you can talk about it, that you had starting that first week of January. Brooklyn, do you want to go first?
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, I could go.
Great, perfect.
Yeah, so coming into the course, actually, this was super pivotal for me personally because I started as my graduate program in the spring. So this was one of the first classes that I ever even experienced on Colorado State's campus. So it was really great for me, just where I was at in my studies and transitioning from being a professional to going back to being a student. It was great to be in a collaborative environment that was focused on learning. And I love museums, and I was not working in museums prior to coming back to grad school. So it was nice to be back in a space that values representation, and really great to surround myself with peers that value the same things. And I learned a lot from my peers just through the collaborative process. So I think that my expectations for the class and the exhibit were definitely exceeded in terms of, finding a community of people that is like-minded.
I really liked hearing that. Thanks for sharing. That was very kind, and I resonate with much of what you said. For me, I was really looking forward to the opportunity to work on an actual project that was going to be installed as an exhibition. And so, yes, it definitely met my expectations in that sense. And yet we also had one day a week that we were also dedicated to reading scholarly works and having group discussions. So we were working on this project one day a week in class, and then a lot of time away from class. And then there was another day a week, kind of a lab time as well, that we were reading different assigned pieces of literature and having really great discussions about them. So I was very satisfied with both the intellectual work that this class offered, but also the hands-on and final project accomplishment that came along with that. So yeah, it was kind of the best of both worlds for any kind of course you could experience.
That's so great. Yeah, I think this was such a wonderful mix of the two sides of that for a graduate seminar course. And that sort of brings us to the end of our discussion. I'd love to open up the floor for any questions from the audience. And I did also want to share that both Sarah and Brooklyn, through all of the knowledge they gained during the installation and research of this exhibition, will be moving forward and curating their own individual exhibitions at the Avenir in the coming year. So there will be much more to come from Sarah and Brooklyn at the museum. So if you have questions about what we talked about this evening, or about what they are going to work on in the future, I think we would welcome anything in either of those veins.
Well, that's super exciting. Congratulations, Brooklyn and Sarah. I look forward to all the things that you have yet to do. I do have a couple questions that have been submitted to me, and anyone watching live right now, you're welcome to comment on YouTube, or you can email me questions that you have. But one question was, do you notice more mannequins everywhere you go now that you've done this project?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned this, but I came from the industry as a visual merchandiser. So I was pretty sensitive to mannequins prior to this because I worked very closely with them. And even as we were researching this exhibit, I got into a discussion with someone that I worked with, and they said, they were asking if males felt the same way about mannequins as most, females do. And it was interesting that those questions were coming from the retail industry, and then we were more examining them through the museum industry, and kind of seeing those two things at the same time, just completely organically coming up in my life. So I don't know if I notice them more or if they're just drawn to me more, but I definitely have talked a lot more about mannequins in the past 6 months than I ever have.
I think the aspect of mannequins that I notice more is related back to that piece of literature that I shared, where the different gender mannequins were oriented in different either postures or groupings. And so when I see mannequins together in groups, I'm looking at, okay, what's their orientation? Is there a certain gender that these mannequins are potentially attempting to display? What's going on here, and what subliminal messaging about kind of the psychosocial setup of these mannequins is being displayed here?
That's super interesting. I love that you both are analyzing things left and right because of your experience. That's what's so amazing, I think, about education and different experiences that we have. The other question I have is, do you think that more retail spaces and museums will adapt more inclusion and representation in mannequins? I know that was kind of talked about a little bit at the beginning, but what are you finding about the future of mannequins?
So I think that in both cases, both retail and the museum industry, it's driven by the clothes, the objects in the museum sense. But as the retail industry makes strides towards being more inclusive of different shapes and types of bodies, you have to think about whose clothing is surviving. So the things that we have in our collection are reflective of a very particular, not the whole collection, but a vast majority of the collection fits a very specific, range of sizes. So I think that for the museum industry, it starts with accessioning things into the collection that are more representative of people, which will push the museum or the mannequin industry forward. So it kind of is on museum professionals to seek out those things and make their collections more diverse and inclusive to drive the need for more inclusive ways to display those items.
I think Brooklyn is absolutely correct there, and finding objects of historically underrepresented populations is absolutely a goal going forward for the Avenir. We truly want to be an inclusive resource for all of our students on campus, for all we cannot collect indiscriminately, but for areas that will truly support our program and our students going forward. The other thing I want to touch on for the museum side of things, mannequins are a necessity. They support the pieces as they're shown in an exhibit, but they're also a conservation issue. Most mannequins cannot be corseted, cannot be molded in a way to fit particularly historic garments that were built for a certain type of silhouette. So we do have to think broadly about mannequins truly as an apparatus of conservation. So not trying to put on a early 19th century piece on a 20th century mannequin body form that would completely destroy the object. So there are a lot of levels that we have to think about, and there are absolutely ways for us to broaden the inclusivity while still protecting those objects from a conservation standpoint.
I wanted to mention one other brief, just point that I'm noticing as a trend with some clothing museums, which is using basically like non-mannequin mannequins, invisible mannequins. So building out a stand that displays the garments, but without any arms or legs or torso that's visible. And I really only have a follow-up question to that trend, which is, what happens when we start to, depersonalize or take the image of people out of these garments, and what is lost when that becomes a trend, either because it looks sleeker or because it's easier to do that than to deal with all these social and political constructs we're talking about. But I really question what happens when we just display a garment when really the garments are related to material culture and the lived experience of humans.
That is such an excellent point, Sarah. I have thought about that not quite as eloquently as you just stated it, but even at the Avenir, our mannequins, for the most part, are faceless. And they do have a body, they have arms, legs, and they have a head, but where the facial features should be is a blank. And we purposely selected those, as I think one of you stated in the beginning, that because the mannequin's intention is to be relatively invisible, to highlight the garments that they're wearing. But we are already, with that really simple choice, we've taken away part of the humanization by removing the facial features. So are we continuing that trend? Or I think it's a really interesting thought, and something that has been kind of niggling in the back of my mind for some time.
That is really interesting. Surprise, you have 3 minutes left. I would love, as we're kind of closing up with our few minutes here, I was very interested when Megan mentioned that both of you, Brooklyn and Sarah, are going to be continuing on and doing another exhibit. So do you mind taking a minute or so each to share what's next for you two?
Yeah, so actually what Sarah said perfectly segues into my research interests. I'm interested in studying sentimental textiles and how people attach meaning to them. So, just hearing like the narrative stories that people have about textiles that might not necessarily be what you would think of when I say sentimental textiles. For example, I have many denim jackets, a couple like neck scarves from my grandma that she wore to every football game my grandpa coached. And they're special to me, but why? Like how did I attach that meaning to that textile? I'm really interested in kind of the lineage and genealogy that can live through textiles. So kind of what Sarah said is just the lived experiences of humans and how we experience textiles.
That's super cool.
And I am still a work in progress in this project and life. So I have some interests. The project I'm working on at the museum right now is examining our inventory of broadly non-Western items of dress and textiles. And I'm very interested in non-Western weavings, particularly domestic weavings. And so that could be a topic, but my thesis topic is not necessarily, it won't really lend to an exhibit at this time. So I'll be working with Megan in the coming months to develop a more concretized theme.
Yes, and we're really looking forward to both of these shows. And please just continue to check the Avenir website, and we will update the opening dates and titles and more fleshed out ideas for both exhibitions once we have that nailed down a little bit better.
I love that. Well, I want to give all of you a chance for parting words before we kind of wrap up our wonderful evening we've spent together. Any last final thoughts?
I just want to say to Brooklyn and to Sarah and to all of the students who are in DM 563, what an absolutely amazing job they did putting together the show in such a short time. And I know that you both know this, but I just want to make sure everyone in virtual world knows that this has been one of the most popular exhibitions we've had at the museum. And if you would have told me when I started that our most popular show was going to be a show of naked mannequins, I would have probably just said, you are just, no. But it's the way that it came together. You all did such an absolutely fantastic job, and it will live in perpetuity because of such dedicated work that you all put into it. So thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, my final word would be that I also want to offer gratitude to the supervision and the support from the staff that we had during this project and now into this semester as we do these kinds of events. It feels really good to continue to be held in the learning process by those that are our supervisors and mentors.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel, for coordinating this. I had a lot of fun, and I love talking about the exhibit. It is on view through December 17th, I believe. So stop by the museum and see it if you'd like. I'm sure one of us will be here to walk you through. But thank you so much for the platform.
Amazing. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. Thank you, Megan, Brooklyn, and Sarah. And I hope everyone has a wonderful fall break, and go Rams. Take care, everybody.